The sun was just starting to rise over the small city, casting a soft orange glow over the streets. Most people were still asleep, but the city had its share of early risers, and the police were among them. A quiet tip had come in the night before describing a man who seemed suspicious in the neighborhood. The description was vague, but it was enough to put the officers on alert. They drove slowly through the streets, scanning the sidewalks and entrances to small shops, looking for anyone matching the description. On one particular street, lined with small stores and cafes just beginning to open, a man was walking briskly, carrying a small bag over his shoulder. He was tall, calm, and moved with a purpose. From a distance, he looked ordinary, just another person heading to work or running errands. But the police saw the tip and approached cautiously. They called out for him to stop, and he paused, raising his hand slightly in a calm gesture. The man's calmness did not make the officers feel less tense. They had been trained to expect the unexpected, and in that moment every detail seemed important. His clothing, his bag, his every movement was examined carefully. They asked him for identification, and he provided it immediately without argument. Yet, for reasons that seemed justified at the time, the officers decided to take him in for questioning. There was a mixture of confusion and concern in the air, and a small crowd had begun to gather, curious about the commotion. As the officers guided him into the patrol car, the man remained composed. He did not resist or protest. He simply followed their instructions, speaking politely but without offering unnecessary words. People watching from nearby porches and windows whispered among themselves. Some recognized him as someone who often walked these streets. Others had seen him near the stores before, always quiet and reserved. Questions began to spread. Why was he being taken away? What had he done? Inside the patrol car, the atmosphere was tense but professional. The officers exchanged brief words, checking their notes and the tip they had received. They were careful, trying to follow procedure and ensure that everything was documented properly. The man sat quietly, occasionally glancing out the window. He noticed familiar faces peeking from windows and doorways, their expressions a mix of curiosity and worry. He did not let the situation rattle him, but inside he was aware that his life was about to be affected in ways he could not yet imagine. As the car moved toward the station, the city began to wake. Shopkeepers opened their doors, children walked to school with their backpacks, and the morning air was filled with the smell of fresh bread and coffee. The police station came into view, a solid building of stone and glass with a flag waving in the morning breeze. The man knew the routine of being taken inside would begin: questions, verification, waiting. But he also knew that he had done nothing wrong and that the truth would come out. Inside the station, the atmosphere was different from the streets. The walls were plain, the lighting bright, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Officers moved back and forth, attending to paperwork and calls. The man was escorted to a small room where he was asked to sit. He obeyed silently, folding his hands in front of him. The officers started the questioning, asking about his name, address, and the reason he was in the area. He answered clearly, calmly, without hesitation. The officers noticed something unusual. Despite their initial suspicion, nothing in his answers suggested any criminal activity. His documents checked out, his story was consistent, and yet they still held him. They debated among themselves, trying to understand why the tip had led them here. Some suggested releasing him immediately, while others wanted to continue the questioning just to be thorough. The tension in the room was palpable, as both sides struggled to balance procedure with common sense. Meanwhile, outside the room, whispers of the arrest had already started to spread. Neighbors called friends who called family members. People shared their curiosity and concern online, posting about the man being taken away. The social media buzz grew rapidly, painting different pictures of the situation. Some assumed the worst, while others defended the man, saying he looked calm and honest. The community was divided, and the story began to take on a life of its own, independent of the actual events. Back inside, the man remained composed. He did not argue or raise his voice. He understood that the police were doing their job as they saw fit, even if it was based on incomplete information. He answered questions patiently, sometimes repeating details when asked. His demeanor was steady, giving no hint of fear or anger, only a quiet confidence. The officers noticed this, and some began to feel uneasy. They realized that something about him did not fit the profile they had in mind. Hours passed slowly. The man was asked to wait while officers made phone calls and checked databases. He observed the activity in the station. The seriousness of the officers, the clatter of keyboards, the occasional laugh over a shared joke, the constant ringing of phones. He thought about his own life, his career, and the strange twist that had brought him here. It was surreal, but he remained grounded, focused on the truth and on remaining calm. The story of the arrest continued to ripple through the neighborhood. People speculated about why someone would be taken away for no apparent reason. Conversations happened in cafes, on street corners, and in bus lines. Some worried about the safety of their community, while others questioned the judgment of the police. Yet everyone agreed on one thing. The man being arrested did not seem like a criminal. His quiet presence, his polite manner, and his calm behavior contradicted the fears that had led to the arrest. In the station, a senior officer decided to take a closer look at the man's identification and background. He realized that something was unusual, a detail that did not fit the typical pattern. The officer began to investigate more thoroughly, running checks through various systems. The man continued to wait, his patience unwavering, knowing that soon the situation would unfold one way or another. There was a sense of inevitability in the air, a feeling that what had begun as a misunderstanding was about to reveal a truth much larger than anyone had expected. Outside, the city continued its morning routines. Children laughed on their way to school, shopkeepers arranged displays, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. Life went on, but for the man and the officers, the hours felt heavier. Every minute brought anticipation and a growing awareness that this incident would not be forgotten easily. The balance between procedure and perception, between suspicion and reality, hung in the air like a delicate thread. Finally, as the first part of this story concluded, the man remained seated, calm and composed, while the officers began to sense that the situation was far from ordinary. The quiet streets outside contrasted sharply with the tension inside the station. It was a moment that would soon change everything, a turning point that would reveal truths that none of them could have imagined when they first approached a simple man, walking in the early morning light. Inside the police station, the room felt smaller than it really was. The fluorescent lights above cast a harsh glow on the walls, highlighting every crease in the man's calm face. He remained seated in the same chair, hands folded neatly on his lap, observing everything quietly. Officers came and went, each bringing a new question or a request for identification. Each time he answered politely, never raising his voice, never showing frustration. The contrast between his calm demeanor and the anxious officers created a strange tension in the room. The interrogation began formally. One of the younger officers started with basic questions, asking where he lived, what he did for work, and why he was in that part of town. The man responded clearly, providing exact addresses and details of his daily routine. The officer listened carefully but could not shake a nagging doubt. Something about the man's behavior did not fit the description from the tip, but the officer felt compelled to follow procedure. He made notes, documenting every word, every gesture, every detail. The man noticed the scrutiny but did not flinch. He had been through situations where patience was essential, and this was no different. He answered all questions truthfully, repeating information when necessary, always maintaining his composure. Despite the seriousness of the situation, he radiated calm. It was a quiet confidence, not arrogance, and it made some of the officers uncomfortable. They were used to suspects who argued, fidgeted, or tried to escape responsibility. This man did none of those things. As the questioning continued, another officer entered, bringing a laptop and a small stack of files. She explained that they were trying to verify the man's identity and background. The man handed over his documents again, allowing the officer to check everything thoroughly. Hours seemed to stretch endlessly. Outside the interrogation room, officers whispered among themselves, trying to reconcile the man's ordinary appearance with the seriousness of the tip they had received. Some began to doubt whether they had made a mistake, while others insisted on continuing the process, citing protocol and caution. During the interrogation, the man calmly answered more detailed questions. He described his daily life, his routines, and even small personal habits. He spoke about his walks in the morning, the shops he liked to visit, and the people he sometimes met on the street. His tone was steady, never defensive, never anxious. As he spoke, a few of the officers started to notice inconsistencies in their assumptions. The more they learned, the less the situation seemed to match their initial fears. Still, their training prevented them from immediately letting him go. The atmosphere was tense, but the man's presence seemed to slow the tension rather than heighten it. Even when the questions became repetitive or seemingly unnecessary, he answered without irritation. He understood that the officers were doing their jobs the best they knew how. His patience and politeness began to shift the mood slightly. Some officers softened, realizing that this was not a standard interrogation. They began to wonder if the tip had been mistaken or exaggerated. Meanwhile, outside the room, the community's curiosity continued to grow. People who had seen the man arrested shared stories with friends, co-workers, and family members. Social media posts speculated about his identity, some portraying him as suspicious, others defending him. Local forums buzzed with debate. People recalled seeing him in the neighborhood before, always polite, always calm. The online discussions began to influence those at the station, as officers occasionally glanced at their phones and noticed the growing attention. Inside, the senior officer decided to run more thorough checks. He contacted various databases, seeking any information that might explain the situation. Calls were made, confirmations requested, and files scrutinized. The man remained seated, quietly observing the process. He did not interrupt, nor did he comment on the flurry of activity. He knew the truth about his identity would soon surface, but he also knew that the timing of its revelation was not something he could control. The officers began to talk among themselves, questioning the validity of the tip that had led to the arrest. They discussed the man's calm demeanor, the accuracy of his documents, and the lack of any evidence pointing to illegal activity. Tension between the officers increased slightly, as some insisted on following protocol, while others argued that they should release him immediately. The debate was quiet but serious, reflecting the gravity of the mistake that might have been made. The man, sitting calmly, noticed the subtle changes in the room. He observed how some officers shifted in their seats, how others avoided making eye contact, and how the tone of conversation changed. It was clear that they were beginning to doubt their initial assumptions. He stayed silent, knowing that his role was to answer questions truthfully and allow the process to unfold. He felt no need to argue, no need to prove himself in a confrontational way. Patience, he knew, would reveal the truth faster than any argument. Hours passed, and the investigation into his identity continued. Each new check and cross-reference slowly revealed that this man was not just an ordinary citizen. Details emerged that puzzled the officers. His service record, his professional background, and his accomplishments were not typical of someone who would be described as suspicious in a casual tip. The officers began to feel the weight of their potential mistake, realizing that they had arrested someone of significant importance. Anxiety mixed with embarrassment as they considered the consequences of having treated a respected figure in this manner. During the questioning, the man maintained his calm and collected manner. He shared personal anecdotes and small stories from his life, illustrating his routine and the simplicity of his daily activities. His openness, coupled with his composed demeanor, gradually shifted the atmosphere in the room. Officers who had been skeptical began to listen more attentively, noticing that nothing in his behavior or speech indicated wrongdoing. The more they learned, the more the arrest seemed unnecessary and misguided. Outside the station, the community's curiosity reached a new level. Local news stations picked up the story, reporting that a man had been arrested under unclear circumstances. Speculation ran rampant, and residents shared their own observations, painting a picture of a calm, polite man who seemed far removed from any criminal activity. The man's reputation in the neighborhood, already quietly respected, began to garner attention and support. People expressed concern about the fairness of the arrest, questioning why someone so ordinary in appearance and manner could have been taken into custody. Inside, the senior officer decided to contact higher authorities to ensure that all protocols were followed. They needed to verify everything about the man's identity before making any further decisions. The man complied without hesitation, providing any information requested. He did not demand respect or recognition, even though he knew that his status would soon become clear. His behavior continued to demonstrate humility, patience, and understanding. As the day progressed, the tension in the station slowly shifted from suspicion to curiosity. Officers began to piece together the man's background, noting accomplishments and responsibilities that were far beyond ordinary. The more they learned, the more they realized that their initial assumptions had been flawed. The man's calm demeanor and honesty made it clear that he had been arrested under a misunderstanding. Yet the situation was delicate and required careful handling. Finally, as the questioning continued, the man's patience and composure began to influence the officers. They found themselves reassessing not only the situation at hand, but also the importance of thorough verification and the dangers of assumptions. Each new detail revealed the gravity of the mistake and the necessity of correcting it quickly and respectfully. The room, once filled with tension and uncertainty, slowly began to settle into a quiet focus on getting the facts right and resolving the misunderstanding in a professional manner. The hours in the interrogation room stretched, but the man remained composed, confident that the truth would eventually emerge. He observed the officers' subtle shifts in behavior, their quiet glances and whispered conversations, and knew that their perception of him was changing. He continued to answer questions calmly and truthfully, never raising his voice, never showing frustration, and never losing his sense of dignity. By the end of the day, the officers began to recognize that the situation was extraordinary. The man, who had been described as suspicious based on a vague tip, was revealing himself to be someone far beyond ordinary expectation. His calmness, his honesty, and his clear background began to shift the perspective of everyone in the room. It was a moment of quiet realization. Assumptions could be misleading. Patience was powerful, and respect for the individual, no matter the circumstances, was essential. As the morning stretched into the afternoon, the atmosphere in the police station had changed. The officers, who had arrived with a sense of certainty about their actions, now felt a mixture of confusion and growing unease. The man, who had remained calm throughout the questioning, seemed almost unaffected by the long hours. He sat quietly, observing the officers as they moved back and forth, making phone calls and checking records. The realization that something about him was unusual began to take shape, though no one yet fully understood what it meant. One of the senior officers decided to run a deeper background check. Using access to government and military databases, he carefully examined the man's personal information. At first, the results seemed ordinary: name, date of birth, residence, but then a particular detail caught his attention. There was a connection that did not appear on the surface, something that required further verification. The officer's brow furrowed, and he called over a colleague to confirm the details. Both of them stared at the screen, disbelief slowly spreading across their faces. The officer explained quietly to his colleague that the man's service record indicated a very high-ranking position in the military. They cross-checked the information multiple times to ensure there had been no mistake. Each verification confirmed the same startling fact. The man in the interrogation room was an army chief, a person of great responsibility and respect within the military hierarchy. The officers were silent for a moment, realizing the gravity of the situation. They had arrested someone whose position was far above what they had imagined, someone whose actions and reputation carried national significance. The news spread slowly through the station. Officers who had been directly involved in the arrest now looked at the man with a mixture of awe and embarrassment. They understood immediately that this was not just a simple misunderstanding. It was a serious error that could have major consequences. The man, still seated calmly, noticed the shift in the room. He did not react outwardly, but he could sense the tension and the subtle gestures of apology and realization around him. A commanding officer was contacted to address the situation. He arrived promptly, carrying the weight of authority and a sense of urgency. After a brief explanation from the senior officer, he entered the room where the man was seated. The man greeted him politely, his tone steady and respectful. The commanding officer's eyes widened as he recognized the individual's identity, and a mix of relief and concern crossed his face. This was no ordinary person. They had inadvertently detained a high-ranking military official. The commanding officer immediately instructed that the man be released. He explained that while procedure must always be followed, the circumstances required careful handling and respect for the individual's position. The officers in the room listened attentively, aware that their actions, though well-intentioned, had placed them in a delicate situation. The man nodded, acknowledging the instructions, his demeanor unchanged, composed, and dignified. As the man was formally released from the questioning, the officers took steps to correct the record. They apologized for the misunderstanding, ensuring that their tone was professional and sincere. The man accepted the apologies with quiet grace, demonstrating a sense of humility that only deepened the respect the officers felt for him. There was no anger, no bitterness, only a calm acknowledgement that mistakes could happen, and the important thing was to address them responsibly. The discovery of the man's identity had an immediate impact on the broader community. Word of the arrest and subsequent revelation began to circulate through news outlets and social media. People were astonished by the irony of the situation. A respected Army chief had been arrested based on a vague tip and mistaken assumptions. Public opinion quickly shifted from curiosity to admiration for the man's composure and patience throughout the ordeal. The story became a topic of national conversation, highlighting both the importance of thorough verification and the potential for human error in law enforcement. Within the station, officers reflected on their own actions. There were discussions about how assumptions and incomplete information could lead to serious consequences. Training protocols were reviewed, and the importance of verifying identities carefully before making arrests was emphasized. The man's calm handling of the situation became a quiet lesson for the officers, demonstrating that dignity and patience could transform a tense moment into an opportunity for learning and reflection. Throughout this process, the man maintained his calm demeanor. He interacted politely with every officer, answering any remaining questions and providing clarifications as needed. His professionalism and composure left a strong impression on everyone in the station. Even those who had initially been skeptical began to recognize the extraordinary nature of his behavior. He handled the situation with a quiet confidence, understanding that the revelation of his identity was enough to correct the misunderstanding without any need for confrontation. The senior officers began to document the incident carefully. They wanted to ensure that the events were accurately recorded, both for internal review and to provide a transparent account to the public if necessary. They noted every detail, from the initial tip and arrest to the verification of the man's identity and his subsequent release. The documentation was thorough, reflecting both the seriousness of the error and the professionalism displayed by the man throughout the process. Outside the station, the news of the discovery continued to spread. People who had been following the story were captivated by the unexpected twist. The narrative transformed from a simple arrest to a story of patience, respect, and the importance of careful judgment. Community members expressed admiration for the man's composure and humility, praising his ability to remain calm under pressure and handle a potentially humiliating situation with dignity. As the day progressed, the man left the station. He walked calmly through the doors, acknowledging officers and staff with a polite nod. Outside, the sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting warm light over the streets. People who had gathered nearby recognized him and watched with a mixture of awe and relief. He continued on his way, unhurried, embodying the quiet strength and discipline that had defined his life and career. The incident became a point of reflection for both the police department and the community. Officers discussed ways to improve verification processes and reduce the risk of similar mistakes. Community members shared stories of the man's past contributions and expressed a renewed sense of respect for both law enforcement and the individuals they serve. The man himself became a symbol of patience and dignity, demonstrating that calm composure in the face of misunderstanding could influence not only those directly involved, but also the broader public. In the quiet moments after the incident, the man reflected on the events. He thought about the assumptions that had led to his arrest, the hours of questioning, and the eventual revelation of his identity. There was no anger in his reflections, only a recognition that human error was part of life. He felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that the truth had come to light and that the situation had been resolved with professionalism and respect. For the officers, the day left a lasting impression. They realized that every action, no matter how routine it might seem, could have unexpected consequences. The incident reinforced the importance of patience, verification, and respect for individuals. The man's calm and dignified handling of the situation became an example for them to follow in future interactions, serving as a quiet reminder that respect and professionalism could transform even the most tense situations into learning experiences. As evening approached, the city began to settle into its usual rhythm. People returned home from work, children played in the streets, and the neighborhood's familiar sounds filled the air. The story of the arrest and discovery remained fresh in the minds of those involved, a remarkable tale that combined suspense, surprise, and human dignity. The man, having navigated the experience with quiet strength, returned to his own life, leaving behind a story that would be remembered as both a cautionary tale and an inspiring example of calm composure in the face of misunderstanding. The moment the man was formally released from the station, a sense of relief filled the room. Officers who had been tense and uncertain throughout the day now exchanged quiet nods, acknowledging the unusual turn of events. The man stood, adjusted his jacket, and thanked the officers politely, his voice calm and measured. There was no anger in his tone, no bitterness in his expression, only a sense of composure that seemed almost unshakable. The commanding officer gave a few final instructions, ensuring that the proper documentation reflected the extraordinary circumstances of the arrest and release. As the man walked through the station doors, the morning bustle had grown into the full rhythm of the day. Shopkeepers called greetings to neighbors, children ran along the sidewalks, and the sound of cars moving through the streets created a familiar backdrop. The man moved with a quiet purpose, acknowledging familiar faces with a gentle nod. People who had witnessed the earlier commotion paused, whispering among themselves as they recognized him. There was a newfound respect in their eyes, a recognition that this was someone who had handled a difficult and potentially embarrassing situation with incredible poise. The police department immediately began to review their procedures. Internal meetings were held not to punish officers, but to reflect on the incident and learn from it. They discussed how assumptions based on vague tips could lead to serious mistakes, and how important it was to verify identities thoroughly before taking action. The officers involved in the arrest offered accounts of their decisions, sharing their thought process and the challenges they faced. The man's calmness throughout the ordeal became a point of discussion, a reminder of how one individual's patience and dignity could influence the behavior of others around him. Meanwhile, word of the release and the man's true identity spread rapidly through the neighborhood and beyond. Local news outlets picked up the story, framing it as both a cautionary tale and an inspiring example of personal composure. Social media was filled with discussions about the arrest, with people expressing amazement at the irony and at the man's behavior. Many praised him for his humility, noting that he could have responded with anger or frustration but had instead chosen patience and respect. Though released, the man received a formal summons as part of the legal procedure. This summons was a procedural necessity, not a punitive measure. He understood that the law required documentation and that even high-ranking officials must comply with certain legal formalities. When the summons arrived, he reviewed it carefully, noting the date and instructions. His response was methodical and respectful, demonstrating his understanding of the law while maintaining the same calm dignity that had defined his behavior throughout the incident. The process of preparing for the summons gave the police department a chance to reflect further. Officers discussed the need to handle situations with care, particularly when the individual involved might have a public or professional stature that could escalate the consequences of an error. Training sessions were scheduled, emphasizing verification protocols and the importance of patience and respect when interacting with the public. The man's example became central to these discussions, illustrating how calmness and professionalism could prevent conflict and foster mutual understanding. Community members continued to follow the story closely. Conversations in cafes, shops, and homes centered around the arrest, the release, and the man's dignified handling of the situation. Many expressed relief that the misunderstanding had been resolved without harm. The story became a teaching point, highlighting the importance of assumptions, respect, and patience in everyday life. People admired the man not only for his professional accomplishments but also for the grace with which he handled a tense and potentially humiliating situation. As the date for the summons approached, the man prepared himself. He did so quietly and without fanfare, reviewing his schedule and making sure all necessary documents were in order. He did not view the summons as a punishment or a confrontation, but as a formal requirement, something to comply with calmly and professionally. His preparation reflected the same attention to detail and discipline that had been evident throughout his life and career. Those who observed him noticed that even in the face of public attention and personal inconvenience, he remained composed and respectful. On the day of the summons, he arrived at the appropriate location punctually. Officers greeted him with a mixture of respect and acknowledgement of the extraordinary circumstances that had brought him there. The man's presence commanded quiet attention, not through force or intimidation, but through the calm confidence and dignity he carried. The procedural steps were carried out efficiently, with all parties maintaining professionalism and courtesy. The process, which could have been tense or uncomfortable, unfolded smoothly due to the man's steady and respectful approach. Throughout the event, the man answered any questions and provided any additional clarifications needed. His tone was consistent, polite, and measured, never wavering in the face of curiosity or scrutiny. Officers and officials present could not help but admire his composure. They were reminded that handling situations with patience and dignity often diffused tension and ensured that processes could proceed smoothly. Even those who had been skeptical of him initially now recognized the value of respect and calmness in human interactions. The community followed updates about the summons closely. Social media platforms and local news highlighted the completion of the legal process and praised the man for his calm and dignified approach. Discussions emerged about the lessons learned from the incident, focusing on the importance of verifying information, respecting individuals, and handling errors with responsibility. The man's behavior became a model for both law enforcement and the general public, illustrating how patience and professionalism could transform a potentially embarrassing or tense situation into a positive example. After the formal process was completed, the man returned to his daily life. He moved quietly through the neighborhood, engaging with people politely but without drawing unnecessary attention to himself. The respect he had earned through his behavior was evident in the way people acknowledged him. Conversations about the incident often included admiration for his humility and patience. Residents reflected on how ordinary people could face unexpected challenges with composure, and how calmness and dignity could command more respect than confrontation or anger. The police department continued to review the incident, documenting lessons learned and updating protocols to prevent similar misunderstandings in the future. Officers who had participated in the arrest were encouraged to reflect on the situation, considering how assumptions and incomplete information could lead to serious consequences. The man's example became central to this reflection, showing that calm composure, patience, and respect could significantly influence outcomes. In the days following the summons, the story of the man, the arrest, and the revelation of his identity remained a topic of conversation in the community. People admired the way he had handled the entire experience, recognizing that his patience and dignity had turned a difficult situation into a lesson for others. Local schools, community groups, and civic organizations discussed the incident, using it to illustrate the importance of respect, responsibility, and thoughtful action in everyday life. For the man himself, the experience was a reminder of the unpredictability of life. He reflected on the assumptions that had led to his arrest, the hours of questioning, and the eventual resolution. He carried no bitterness or resentment, only a quiet acknowledgement that mistakes could happen and that patience, dignity, and respect were powerful tools for navigating such moments. His calm approach throughout the process left a lasting impression on everyone involved, from police officers to neighbors, creating a story that would be remembered for its lessons in patience, professionalism, and human decency. As the sun set over the city, the streets returned to their familiar rhythm. People moved about their evening routines, children played outside, and the quiet hum of everyday life filled the neighborhood. The man continued his day calmly, knowing that the incident, though unusual, had been resolved properly. The story of the arrest and the summons had become more than a simple news item. It was now a lesson in humility, patience, and respect, demonstrating that even in challenging circumstances, human dignity could guide actions and leave a lasting impression. After the formal summons was completed, life slowly returned to normal for the man and the officers involved. Yet the incident had left a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed or learned about it. The city, which had been briefly consumed by curiosity and speculation, now reflected on the lessons from the arrest and release. For the man, the experience was a reminder of the unexpected challenges life could present. even to someone disciplined and careful in every aspect of his professional and personal life. The police department took the incident seriously. Internal reviews and meetings examined every step of the process. Officers discussed what went right, what went wrong, and how they could prevent similar situations in the future. They focused on improving procedures for verifying identities, evaluating tips, and approaching situations without assumptions. The lessons went beyond protocol. They were also about human behavior, patience, and the importance of respect. The man's conduct became a quiet example within the department, a demonstration of how composure and dignity could influence the behavior of others. Community members continued to reflect on the story. People shared their experiences and impressions of the man, describing him as calm, polite, and composed. Discussions in neighborhood cafes and social gatherings often returned to the incident, highlighting the importance of patience and understanding in everyday interactions. Some parents even used the story as an example for their children, explaining how assumptions could lead to misunderstandings and how dignity and calmness could help resolve tense situations. The man returned to his daily life with the same quiet purpose he had shown throughout the incident. His routines resumed, walking through the neighborhood, visiting familiar stores, and engaging politely with neighbors. But now there was an added layer of respect from those around him. People greeted him with nods and small smiles, aware that he had handled a potentially humiliating situation with extraordinary patience. He continued to embody the values that had guided him throughout his career: discipline, humility, and composure. For the officers, the incident became a story of reflection. They recognized how assumptions and incomplete information had influenced their actions. They acknowledged the importance of verifying facts before taking decisive measures, especially in situations that could have serious consequences. Many officers shared how the man's calm demeanor had affected them personally, teaching them the value of patience and respect, even in stressful circumstances. The experience served as a lasting reminder that law enforcement decisions affect real people and that humanity must always be part of the equation. The media coverage of the story continued for several days, focusing not just on the arrest but also on the man's response. News outlets praised his composure and humility, emphasizing how he had navigated a difficult situation without anger or resentment. Social media discussions highlighted the irony of the incident and the lessons it provided. Many people admired the man not just for his professional accomplishments, but for the way he handled a situation that could have escalated into conflict. The story became a teaching point for civics and social responsibility, illustrating how one person's behavior can influence the broader community. Within the community, the incident sparked conversations about respect and assumptions. People began to discuss how quick judgments could lead to unnecessary misunderstandings and how patience and listening could prevent conflict. Neighborhood leaders organized small discussions about civic responsibility and the importance of treating others with dignity. The man's experience became a symbol of how calmness and respect can turn a tense situation into a positive example. Residents recognized that these lessons were not just for law enforcement, but for everyone in their daily interactions. The man himself reflected quietly on the events. He thought about the initial arrest, the long hours of questioning, and the eventual discovery of his identity. There was no anger or resentment in his thoughts, only a calm understanding that life could be unpredictable and that patience and composure were essential. He felt satisfied that the situation had been resolved properly and that his behavior had demonstrated the values he held dear. The experience reinforced his belief that respect, humility, and professionalism could guide interactions, even in difficult circumstances.